Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on the SDG Action Week. And this session is an SDG Academy. That means we have a deep dive into some aspects, special aspects of the SDGs. It's going to be the last session of this week. So we have the final round is for us. And I think we had some beautiful sessions that will be available on Facebook to look at if you still want to have a part of the, see what information or knowledge is shared. Today we're going to have the SDG Academy and the SDG Action Week is organized by the National Commission for the SDGs on Curaçao, and the commission is part of government. We have 9 ministries that work together in this commission, and we try to get more awareness for the SDGs, but also involve other actors within our policies. So that's why we organize these sessions, and I really hope that you can join us next year and maybe in other opportunities that we have other sessions. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Ghislaine Nicolas. She's our moderator for today. Ghislaine works at the Department of Foreign Affairs of Aruba as a policy officer, and she works on multilateral affairs and economic diplomacy. In this capacity, she engages and conducts the relations of Aruba with the United Nations system and other international and regional organizations as bilateral relations with countries for Aruba. Additionally, she has a seat on the National SDG Commission of Aruba, where she interacts between the international and national dimensions of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to her current function, she has worked at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome and has built experience at the Prime Minister Office with the Bureau of International Affairs and Public Diplomacy. I'm very happy that she was willing to be a moderator today. As SDG commissions of the 3 islands, Aruba, Sint Maarten, and Curaçao, we work together and exchange knowledge. We also work together on our voluntary national review. So I'm very happy that she was able and willing to be our moderator. She knows a lot about SDGs and about the subject. So thank you so much. Ghislaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anneloes, and welcome to everyone, our attendees, also to Mark and Sabine, who will be participating in this session by sharing their insights. I would also like to extend a congratulations to the SDG Commission of Curaçao for organizing this SDG Academy Week. We're sharing insights in how we can implement the Sustainable Development Goals further in the island of Curaçao. As you can see on our sheet, the program will be as follows. In a few minutes, the keynote address will be provided by Mr. Mark Thomas on the business case for the SDGs. I see that he has already shared a couple of handy links in the chat, so please make sure to copy those links for yourself, and which will be followed by sharing her insights and experiences as a social entrepreneur and the founder of Green Phoenix, Ms. Sabine Berendsen. Before we start, I'd like to ask all participants to use the chat box if they have any questions during the sessions. And then during the Q&A part of the program, we can then ask Mark and Sabine to elaborate more on these topics and to answer your questions. I'm very happy that we have here with us today Mr. Mark Thomas, and who is willing to share his expertise and insights on the following subject. His duties at the UN include providing substantive support for strategic planning and coordination of partnerships, both among UN agencies and between the United Nations and development actors from the public, private, and civil society sectors, and participating in resource and finance mobilization for the acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to working with the UN, Dr. Thomas was the Chief Executive Officer of the Cropper Foundation, one of Trinidad and Tobago's most respected civil society organizations, working in the field of private sector approaches to sustainable development issues. He was also a communications specialist at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, a lecturer in physiology and development biology at the University of West Indies in Mona, Jamaica, and a World Health Organization research fellow at the National Institute of Health in the USA. He holds a distinction grade Master of Science degree in Science Media Production and Communication from the Imperial College of London and a PhD in Developmental Physiology from the University of St. Andrews. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Mark Thomas. Mark, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies, my camera on my laptop does not work, and IT has struggled to fix the problem. So you won't be seeing my face during the presentation, but I'm going to share my screen. And that's me. Just I think Ghislaine had a picture of me just now there, but just for information, that's what I look like. So you can put a face to the voice. All right. And of course, I'm doing a presentation today about the business case for the SDGs and how Curacao companies can benefit. I may actually focus more on the second part of that, that sentence about Curacao companies benefiting from the SDGs. Right. And so what I'm hoping to achieve from today's presentation is to illustrate how Curacao companies can use the SDGs to capitalize on business opportunities and to avoid or mitigate business risks. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit more. And I'll also hopefully indicate how the UN can support Curacao and its private sector in maximizing SDG integration and getting the benefits from that integration down the line. And I think Green Phoenix will probably illustrate well about how, you know, integrating the SDGs can be a good business proposition. Right. Now, businesses and the SDGs, I don't know if anybody was in the presentation on Monday, but just touching on a couple of things from that presentation. There are basically three ways in which businesses interact with the SDGs. And the sort of low-hanging fruit, the simplest of them is philanthropy, the giving that you give to charitable causes. All right. And Caribbean companies, including those in the Dutch islands, are very generous philanthropists. I think on average, UNDP did a study in the Caribbean, and they found that companies give between 2 and 4% of their profits to the SDGs. All right. So there's a lot of giving by companies towards causes. Philanthropy, of course, is not as structured as it can be in other parts of the world. And it's more ad hoc and responsive rather than addressing specific issues. And there is a space for philanthropy to be more aligned with the SDGs. All right. And of course, when a company gives its philanthropy and more so when it gives its philanthropy towards the SDGs, it's giving back to the community. It enhances the company's brand. Right, so it improves the company's public reputation, and this can actually add to sales and profits, right, via the company's philanthropic efforts. And also, especially with the new generation of millennials entering the workplace, they generally seek out companies that are a little bit more civic-minded. So you find that if a company's philanthropy demonstrates its vision of a more sustainable world or a more equitable and just world and dealing with sort of environmental issues, the quality of the employees that company can attract is usually higher, right? Of course, there should be more enabling policies and incentives to help companies give their philanthropy more towards the Sustainable Development Goals or to align their philanthropy with Sustainable Development Goals. And business chambers and so on should advocate for governments to provide these policies and incentives if they do not yet exist. As far as I know, they don't exist in Curacao. But the problem with philanthropy, of course, from a business sense, is of course you're giving money away. All right. It has a negative effect on your bottom line. So while it's very noble, it can be a turn-off to many companies, and it is in fact a turn-off to many investors because it negatively affects the bottom line. I use the example of education here because it's like a really nice thing that companies can address via their philanthropy. And I showed some statistics for Curacao. Actually, Curacao does really well in education. But since we have Green Phoenix here, of course, if you were a company and you were giving your philanthropic donations towards recycling projects or to employing youth in civil society organizations, the NGOs that are undertaking that kind of work, that is philanthropy. All right. If you were like, let's say an energy company and you gave your money towards recycling projects, that technically has nothing to do with your business. You're doing it out of some charitable impetus. All right, so that is your philanthropy. Now, to assist companies with their philanthropy, unfortunately, it's a book that's designed for Trinidad, but the content is applicable anywhere. All right, so we have a book that can help companies align their philanthropy more with the SDGs. All right, and the link to this book is in the chat. The other way in which companies can interact with the SDGs is via their corporate social responsibility. And this is just about companies being doing good or being good corporate citizens, right? And where we think of ourselves when we do good as being a good citizen, companies, when they do good things, are good corporate citizens. And this is CSR, or corporate social responsibilities, when a company recognizes that it can have negative social, economic, and environmental impacts, right? And they take steps to minimize or to enhance their record in terms of the negative impacts that they can possibly have. So sticking with the example of recycling and recycling initiative, if a company that has nothing to do with recycling of bottles, right, set up containers in its lobby or in its parking lot for employees and for the general public to put bottles that can be recycled, that there is corporate social responsibility. It has nothing to do, again, with the company's core business. It's just the company being a better corporate citizen. All right. This again enhances the company's brand and can enhance its the profits and the profitability of the companies. And as before, it can attract more talented and more loyal employees. And also, take the example of a company that exchanges incandescent light bulbs with LED light bulbs, or a company that reduces its carbon footprint by installing solar panels, etc. What it can do is lead to efficiencies and mitigation of risks, right? So if the grid electricity goes down and you have solar power, you still have electricity, you've mitigated risks. And as with philanthropy, what we need and what should like business chambers and so on should advocate for are policies and incentives to encourage companies to align their CSR with these sustainable development goals. All right. Now, if you think about it, if I'm putting like bins for beverage containers out in my parking lot or in my lobby, and I'm arranging for those beverage containers to be recycled or taken to the recycling plant, that is again potentially cash negative to my business. Right? So although I'm doing good and I'm being a very good corporate citizen, again, it can turn off some investors in the short run. Right? And I put the example here, although we're talking about recycling. I just put the example of energy Curacao is doing quite well in terms of the integration of renewables into its energy, its energy provision, right? And if companies, which tend to be amongst the largest energy users within a country, start to shift from relying on fossil fuel generated grid energy towards renewables, then it can actually help the country by enhancing, making it more energy secure, and ultimately reducing the entire country's carbon footprint. Now, the ISO has ISO 26000, which is guidance on corporate social responsibility. So companies that want to integrate social responsibility and to do so in a demonstrable and way can become adherents towards ISO 26000. And the link to ISO 26000 is also in the chat, right? But where I want to spend most of my time today is about ESG, which is where companies can be profitable by doing good. So it's not that you're doing good and being cash negative, but you set out to do good as a way of making profit, all right? And I think this is where most of the benefits, sorry for sounding like a capitalist, but it's where most of the benefits, I think, and where most of the motivation for companies to adopt the SDGs can potentially come from. Now, the ESG, it's an acronym for environment, social, and governance, all right? So ESG is a business philosophy, right, and a business approach that treats sustainability as the foundation for new lines and models of business. So being sustainable is actually core to your business, your operations, the products that you deliver, the services that you provide, all right? And via ESG, it's an unapologetic pursuit of profit. So you're doing good to pursue profit, not just for sort of altruistic reasons, as with the case of philanthropy and corporate social responsibility, all right? Now, as we will see later on down the line, you get the most benefits from ESG if you demonstrate your performance and how you deal with environment, social, and governance related risks, your exposure to those risks. We'll talk about that later down in the presentation, right? But by verifiably and demonstrably integrating these things into your business plans, your business strategies, what you would do is you would mitigate risks, right, including reputational risks. And also you will also be better able to capitalize on opportunities that are presented. A good example would be if you're a company that is very reliant on water resources, let's say, all right? It is in your interest to demonstrate to you, well, it's in your interest for your company's survival to pay greater attention to how water resources are managed, right? Both within your company and within the society in which you're operating, all right? And to try as a company to enhance water management, because water is so essential to your business and to your business strategy, all right? So that's just one way in which you can think about it. And also by being an ESG sort of like integrated company, what you're doing, you have more productive communication with shareholders, employees, regulators, government, and the media. So you'd have better licenses to operate because, you know, the government knows that if you were mining, for example, that you pay due attention to the environmental damage that a mining company can have when it is undertaking its operation, and it plans to minimize or mitigate those risks. Now, ESG is where it's at right now, right? Already the ESG investment tops more than $41 trillion US, right? And it accounts for more than 10% of all investment around the world, okay? So, and exponentially growing, all right? In fact, it's supposed to be by $53 trillion by year 2025, okay? And from a Dutch islands perspective, what is really good is that many pension funds, including the Dutch pension funds, are actually leaders in this space, right? So I think there was, the Dutch pension funds have stated that they will only invest in ESG compliant investments, in companies that are ESG compliant, all right? The Nordic fund, which is really quite large from the Scandinavian countries, they too have said that they will only invest in ESG compliance companies. So companies that demonstratively integrate ESG, they have a lot of investment potential. The Securities Exchange Commission in the United States has just introduced ESG regulations so that listed companies on the New York Stock Exchange, and of course this holds for many European countries as well, that they have to disclose their ESG performance. And they have to do so in a verifiable way, sort of like the equivalent of how you would have financial audits of companies. You will also have ESG audits. Auditors will come in and verify that what you're saying is your ESG performance is actually the case. Now, to support companies with ESG, we've developed a few guides. They're also in the chat room. There's a pocket guide, which is designed to sort of like be read like over a meal, you know, like while you're eating, all right? And then there's the full guide, which is much longer and a bit more detailed and has more of the tools and so on that a company can use. Both of those guides are in the chat. The full guide is still being edited, so the version that I shared is still a draft, okay? But it's hoped that it will be ready by the end of October, at which point I will share it with Annalise, and she will make it available to anyone else. I'm sorry if I keep massacring your name, Annalise. Okay, right. Now, ESG, again, is a philosophy that recognizes that your customer, that a company's customers, its employees, the regulators, and importantly, investors are increasingly looking beyond a company's financial achievements, all right? And are also looking to its performance on environmental, social, and governance issues, right? And from the performance on those ESG issues, these people, and most importantly, again, your regulators and your investors and your customers are making value judgments about the value of your products, the quality of the company's management, its exposure to risks and its ability to grasp opportunities, and its chances of long-term success. So going back to like that water resources example I had, if you were an investor and you did your homework on a company and you saw that it was reliant on water, but it did not have a plan about how it would obtain and manage water resources, you can see that that would put you off from investing in that company. Yes? And therefore, you make value judgments about companies' attractiveness as an investment proposition. Now, ESG as well can also help your company identify its strengths and weaknesses, all right? So it can help by, if you identify your strengths in terms of, let's say that you are using a particular non-renewable resource, right? And you have institute a business plan by which you replace a non-renewable resource with a renewable resource, you are leveraging opportunities. If you are demonstrating your ESG performance, it can help you enter new marketplaces, especially the European marketplaces, where there's a lot of regulation with regards to your company's environmental performance, their governance performance on things such like tax transparency and so on, and their social performance, like things like using child labor, having a gender equal workplace, etc. All right. And of course, this will open new opportunities for your companies in terms of partnerships and progressive improvements. Like Walmart, for example, they will only partner with with companies that can demonstrably say that they are meeting international standards with regard to labor laws. All right. So if you were abusing labor laws as a company or not satisfying in sort of instituting labor laws at an international standard, you will lose the potential to have Walmart, let's say, as a business partner, right? And because of this sort of again, the verifiable, quantifiable returns, sort of like thinking almost as environmental performance, social performance, governance performance, almost as in the same way that you would think of financial performance as a company, you would become more attractive to investors. Now, I'm not going to go through this slide too much. I know the recording, the session is being recorded, but here I've sort of like laid out, and this is in the pocket guide and in the full guide as well. So you don't have to feel that you need to like read through the entire slide, but you can see that there is a business case that's elaborated here, right, for integrating environment, social, and governance issues into your business strategies and plans, right? Makes you more competitive. It makes you more attractive to investors. It improves your credit rating. You mitigate risks to your companies. You enhance your company's reputation, and you also satisfy more regulatory requirements, and therefore you enhance your licenses to operate in the countries that you operate. You get more favorable terms to operate in the countries in which you operate. All right. Now, I just wanted to touch a little bit on ESG structure. I hope I'm keeping the time well. All right. I don't have that many slides left, but there is a sort of general structure if you're a company that you want to think about, right? There are frameworks by which your ESG performance will be judged, and they're very sort of uniform, although there are many of them, right? There are many different frameworks, but they all have very similar structures, right? Generally, there are 3 pillars: environmental pillar, social pillar, governance pillar. That sort of goes without saying. And then each of those pillars are divided into pertinent business relevant issues. All right. So each issue then, right, and those issues are determined by experts based on how relevant they are in terms of companies, in terms of business of the companies, and also in terms of general sustainability. All right. Now, though each of the issues are relevant to all companies, but of course, some issues would be more relevant to some companies than to others. All right. So if you are an energy company, obviously greenhouse climate change would be more important to you than if you were, let's say, like an educational, a for-profit educational institution. All right. On the other hand, if you were like a social enterprise, you would find that, you know, like being more gender sensitive in your human resources policies is probably more important than if you're an energy company. All right, that sort of goes without saying. And also the geographical location, some things are really, and this is important for Curacao, some of the issues are more important to small island developing states that have certain particular vulnerabilities, especially like climate change, than they are in another company. So if you're an energy company in Curacao, for example, you would probably be held to a little bit higher standard in terms of like climate change than if you're an energy company in, let's say, Lithuania. All right. Okay. All right. So, I just wanted to show like one particular framework that I like because it's really actually the simplest of the frameworks that I've found. And this is from the Financial Times Stock Exchange in England, in the United Kingdom. All right. So it's a FTSE, that's a little acronym for Financial Times Stock Exchange, a FTSE Russell framework. And you can see that there are 3 pillars, this environment, social, and governance pillars. The environment pillar has 5 issues attached to it. The social pillar has 5 issues attached to it. And the governance issue has 4 issues attached to it. So there are 14 issues in all. All right. Okay, so the most popular one that's used within the business community in the United States, and you may have seen it if you're like following sort of investments, is called the MSCI. It's Morgan Stanley Capital Investment ESG framework. All right, that has 41. It's a little bit more complicated than this, but at its core, it's quite simple in sort of the structure. All right. Now, as the UN, we also have a framework, and that is attached to the Global Compact. All right. So anybody can, the link to the Global Compact is also in the chat. You can go onto the Global Compact, where companies can join the Global Compact, right? And via the joining of the Global Compact, it can then be provided with templates for reporting its ESG performance using a UN-developed framework. Needless to say, of course, investors don't like this framework because it tends to be a little bit more stringent than some of the others because it's the UN, all right? The others are probably a little bit more business friendly. The UN one is probably a little bit more altruistic, right? Now, the issues that we saw there are then divided into aspects. So each issue has particular aspects, right? Each issue will then have several aspects attached to it, all right? And I've just put a list here. Again, you don't have to read it all, but there are aspects that are common across the frameworks, regardless of which framework you're using. You as a company, if you want to become ESG compliant or to demonstrate your ESG performance, would generally have to perform on these things, your greenhouse gas emissions, for example, that you don't use child labor, right? That you pay attention to your customer health and safety. You don't produce products that can potentially injure your customers. That you have internal controls for your finances. You do audits. That you have transparency and disclosure mechanism. You disclose your taxes. That you have board diversity. It's not, your boards are not just all white men, all right? That you have some diversity in your board structure, etc. And these are things that all companies are expected to work on and to improve their performance on. Right. Now, what you do, companies, especially listed companies, but I think almost all companies produce annual reports, right? You report to your shareholders on an annual basis. Some companies report even more frequently. What you would do is report not just on your financial performance as a company, but also on your ESG performance in your reporting, all right? And remember how I talked about, the possibility of an ESG audit. What you can then have is ESG rating agencies can come and give you a rating, just as you would have a credit rating as a company or as a personal individual. Your company can have an ESG rating, and the more favorable your company, the better your company's ESG rating, the more favorable your company is to investors, especially to ESG investors. And ESG investing, as I've mentioned with the Dutch pension plan and the Nordic fund, are the fastest growing segment of the investment community, all right? In fact, the world's largest investment company right now, BlackRock, is an ESG investment firm, all right? All right, so I just wanted to talk a bit about getting your rating, because I know some companies, they want to produce this option. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about, all right? So what you would do is your rating agency, let's say you were to choose FTSE Russell, or you were to choose MSCI, or you use the Global Compact, the UN Global Compact. That particular rating agency will say what issues it considers important. For each issue, what aspects of that issue, like for climate change, it'd be greenhouse gas emissions, for example, the volume of fossil fuel that you use, etc. Things like that might be aspects of the climate change issue. And it will assess your performance on the issue via measurements for those aspects, all right? And then they will set benchmarks for what good performance is, all right? And these rating agency will then give your company a score based on your performance on those aspects, all right? And your exposure to the negative aspects of the negative implications of those aspects, all right? So you will end up with both a disclosure score about your performance and an exposure score about how exposed you are to negative aspects of it, all right? And so you'll end up with something like this, all right? On the left, you can see that for each aspect, you will get an exposure score. and you will get a performance score, all right? And those scores will then be plugged into a model, right, that provides weightings that are dictated by the industry that you're in and your geographic location, which I mentioned before. And then you will end up with an issue performance score and an issue exposure score, all right? For each issue, for each of the issues, you will have a performance score, and for each of the issues, you will have an exposure score, all right? That is then also modeled, right? So that for the issues that are within a particular pillar, right, you will have a pillar performance score. So then you'll have, let's say, an environmental score, environmental performance score. And then you will also have an environmental exposure score, all right? And then the model, and when I say model, I mean something like a big equation, all right? So you plug in all this data and it spits these things out at you. And then given your pillar scores, your pillar performance scores and your pillar exposure scores, you will then get the overall ESG rating, right? Which is what I say here, all right? And then again, when you have your ESG rating, these things go onto databases. They are like, you can put it in your company's reporting. Bloomberg has a database of companies' ESG scores. So if you're an investor, and especially younger investors are paying a lot of mind to this right now, if you were an investor that is sort of more civic minded, you would look for companies to put your money in that hold your values, that will meet your demands as an investor for their environmental, social, and governance performance. And more investors are moving in this direction. So sort of like to take home, right? While I open for questions, I think Sabine will probably go next. You know, you companies can enhance their interaction with the SDGs via their philanthropy, right? They can do it as well via their corporate social responsibility. These two things are basically more altruistic aspects of companies being good corporate citizens, right? They don't tend to be enhancing the business and the business's profitability per se. And then also companies can embrace ESG. And the way I sort of think of ESG is that ESG is the Rosetta Stone, you know, the red Rosetta Stone that sort of like had the Greek and then Egyptian hieroglyphs and it was used to decipher one language into another. Think of ESG as a Rosetta Stone for converting the language of sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals, into the language of business, all right? So by companies integrating ESG into their business strategies and their business models, they not only make themselves more viable and more sustainable going forward, they also make themselves more attractive to investors and potentially more profitable. And with that, I will end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark, for your contribution and your explanation, very in-depth on ESG and also in how the private sector is able to also link its business model more towards sustainability. I know that this has been a very long or a discussion that has been going on for quite a long time. And I'm sure that our attendees will also be writing down their questions in the chat box that we can ask you at the end in how this is progressing. And next up, we're going to hear from our second speaker, Ms. Sabine Berendse, who is able to probably share with us how this is actually done in practice. So Sabine is a passionate social entrepreneur with a background in social psychology and conservation. She's a founder of both Sea Turtle Conservation Curacao and Green Phoenix and has valuable insights into the nonprofit as well as the business landscape. She loves to work with diverse stakeholders and has interest in diverse topics such as circularity, social inclusion, sustainability, biodiversity, climate action, entrepreneurship, social and organizational psychology, and environmental psychology, mindset, and coaching. She is always striving to improve herself and do her best to be a positive influence for those around her. It's her goal to create the biggest possible social and environmental impact and to push for a more sustainable world. Sabine, let's hear from you how you're doing this through your foundational work. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Ghislaine, for the introduction. I'll share my screen with you all. And hopefully now you can see my slides. Nope. Okay, everybody can see my slide, right? Can somebody confirm? So yes, I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the case study for Green Phoenix. Most people probably don't know the history of Green Phoenix, but it started on the beaches of Curacao on the North Shore, which are covered by plastic and have been being cleaned up by volunteers since 2015 regularly, like 3 times a week. And it's an ongoing battle against all this plastic, and this is really something that is impacting the environment. We find animals entangled in the plastic. Sea turtles have problems nesting, and this has a huge impact to the nature of Curacao. But plastic doesn't only have a negative impact for nature, but also for human health. So each of us eats about a credit card of microplastic on a weekly basis. And that's really, really shocking to me. And especially the fact that it doesn't just pass through our system, but it's also already found in our blood. So I think these are really, really alarming signals that we really need to change the system. And that's why in 2018, we decided to do something, or we have to do something more structural about plastic pollution. And cleaning up is just fighting symptoms, but it really needs to be a more substantial approach. So we wanted to eliminate waste, and our idea was to do that by creating a circular and inclusive economy. And then the goal was to save our oceans. So a circular economy, when materials stay in the loop, they don't form waste or pollution, and that would save a lot of problems on our island. Because when you would drive somewhere, or when you go somewhere into nature, or maybe if you ever visited a landfill, you can see that waste is a huge issue on our island. And because it's such a small island, you can also see that we don't have unlimited resources to deal with it. But if you want to change a system in a structural way, you have to include everybody. And one of the things I think that the SDGs has helped us is when we were first thinking about wanting to contribute to the life below water, we were looking into the SDGs, and everything really is connected. And if you look at inequity on Curacao, that's a really big thing. And it's really a good thing if everybody in society gets a chance to contribute to the goals. So like I said, everything is connected. In 2018, the idea of Green Phoenix was born. In 2019, we started in the backyard. And fortunately enough, we got an opportunity to go and move to Pavilion Zeelandia in 2020, where we were able to grow the Learn and Work program, or the apprenticeship program, which we started in the backyard with 12 people to 24 people. So this works as the following: people that have been unemployed for a long time, that have a distance to the labor market, get a chance to be in our project for 1 year. So they get extra compensation for every day that they would be present. And during this year, we help them develop their talents and help them find a regular job. 11 of them are currently working with Green Phoenix after they finish this program. So what do? We collect plastic after consumers have used it. So we also still collect at the shoreline. However, that plastic is already a lower quality. So what we try to do is we collect as much as possible from consumers. And that's not only people from the community, but also businesses, resorts, hotels, companies that use more. Then at our facility, it's sorted and transformed into high quality resources by using shredding technology. So basically we cut it into smaller pieces, and a part is used to send abroad to go to bottle facilities, and a part like here where we exported 13 tons. But the high quality flakes we use for our own production, so local production, creating beams and bricks through extrusion. So we melt it, we push it in a mold, and then you get beams, which you can use as substitutes for wood. So you can make chairs, you can make cabinets for on the wall. We can make bricks. So these are like really big Lego bricks that you can use for separation walls inside. You can choose your color, so it can be, you don't have to plaster it, you don't have to paint it, and you can reuse it, which makes it an innovative building material on its own. We also make filament. So filament is a material that we can use to produce new products without a mold. So 3D printing basically prints layer on top of layer on top of layer, which enables you to also go into the air. So we produce vases. And then I'd like to share this video with you guys.
Sabine,
Yeah.
we do not hear the sound of the video. So
Sorry. Then you see it? You do see it?
yes, we do. We do see it. If you do the share screen and you have, you can
let me explain. He's explaining. He went to the beach with us, and he cleaned up. He did a beach cleanup, and then he. How am I doing? He made his own Beyblades. So then I'll make my volume. So he first went to the beach. He did a beach cleanup with us. Then what he did, he came back to Green Phoenix where we have the printers. So then he designed his own Beyblade. He created it on the printers, and then he took it home where he has a machine or a thing that he can launch it. It's like a spinning thing. And then he's showing that how he's launching it in his house. So this young boy is 8 years old, and he is able in only a few days to design his own product, use it with something that he already owns, and then make something that he really wants to own. So if a boy of 8 years old can do this with waste materials, I think that the options are endless. And I think this is one of my favorite videos of all time, because I think this really shows all the potential. If people are a little bit more skilled or more experienced, they can even do a lot more. And so every product that is being produced in Green Phoenix helps clean the environment, because the plastic that is used to make this product is not polluting the island. And I think because of the potential of this project, we just recently received a grant from Resembit, which is meant to increase our impact even more on reducing plastic pollution in the marine environment. So we're going to focus on 3 areas. First would be the scaling of our innovation, of our innovative and creative recycling. So you see a big printer on the screen, right? These are printers that enable us to make bigger items. So the vases that we were making are all basically to prove the concept, because it shows that we can make really beautiful items from waste plastic. And especially when we have machines that are enabling us to make bigger things, the impact of what we're doing can be much bigger. We're going to focus a lot on public awareness, because if you want to create a system, you really don't need a few people to do something perfectly, but we need a lot of people to do the right thing, just a little bit better. And education obviously is key in everything we do, not just young people telling them about recycling, but also how you can use this technology for doing good and creating a more sustainable island. So in everything that we do, we come back to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we evaluate on how are we doing on all these topics, and what can we possibly improve, because it's really important that you reevaluate and maybe change your direction, because during the process you constantly come across things that are different from what you expected it to be, and then you have to readjust a little bit. And I think for us as a company that really is focused on creating a more sustainable island, the SDGs are in our DNA, it's really in our core. And I think a lot of companies around the island and initiatives around the island are contributing really well to a few of the SDGs. And I think for us, because we are so focused on it, we indeed have become an interesting partner for bigger companies to reach their CSR. I think because we offer work opportunities for people that have difficulty finding work anywhere else, we have the most dedicated and loyal team that I could ever have imagined. It's so much fun to work with our team, because every day they surprise me in a positive way. And I think that would not have been possible if we did not have the SDGs as our core. So I think that basically concludes my experiences with the SDG. We are focused on it really a lot. We hope that we can inspire other companies to also do something with Sustainable Development Goals through their corporate social responsibility. And yeah, I think partnering is really important to make it all work and create the sustainable island that our future generations deserve. So thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Sabine, with a very interesting explanation of how you actually grew from the idea, starting actually doing something else, but driven towards a bigger type of how do you call it? Like you went from the beach cleanups to creating your established foundation. So I think that's a very wonderful trajectory.
We're a social enterprise. We're not a foundation.
Okay, social enterprise. My apologies. I do have, now we have the Q&A session for both Mark and Sabine. So if there are still participants that are writing down their questions in the Q&A, then I'll start with our first question from Manfred van Weggel, who questions, how sustainable is philanthropy for the donor and the receiver? Or how can you make it sustainable for those involved? No organization should become dependent on donations alone. I think, Mark, that's maybe a question geared to you in regards to your...
I agree wholeheartedly. Right. And as I mentioned, this is part of the problem with philanthropy, because it's negative to the bottom line of companies, and it's not part of the company's business plan or business model. All right. So if it succeeds, the company gains nothing from it. If it fails, the company loses nothing for it. The stakes are very low for the company. Right. Now I think I wanted to distinguish between philanthropy and charity. because I think, you know, the two terms sort of get mixed up. I may have mixed them up myself while I was presenting. And basically charity is you sort of like, you give money away, all right? And it sort of, again, is very sort of reactive. Philanthropy is a bit more proactive, where you are a bit more, well, in a truer sense, philanthropy is very proactive, where you pay a lot of concern to what is being done, and you hope that what you're funding is catalytic, that it will have a sort of snowballing effect going forward, all right? So some of the most respected sort of philanthropic organizations, let's say like the Gates Foundation, you know, they fund the financing of, let's say, vaccine development. Once there is a malaria vaccine, that has catalytic effects, right? You don't have to go about developing the vaccine again from scratch. You may have to like do, you know, sort of a new booster variations, but generally most of the work is done, and it becomes self-sustaining, and again, sort of it snowballs and it has a bigger effect going forward. I think there's a move as well with philanthropy towards philanthropy supporting social enterprises like Sabine's organization, where you initially, by supporting the organization, you were providing like venture capital almost towards a social enterprise, with the expectation that that social enterprise will then become self-sustaining and no longer be reliant on your finances, all right? And I think by aligning your philanthropy with the sustainable development goals, that's possibly a very good way to get there, because of course the sustainable development goals were designed and at their core are meant to be catalytic. They are things that once we achieve will then have greater effects going forward for society. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark, for your explanation. I'm looking at the chat box. I don't see a new question, but I do have one for Sabine, if you would like to answer that. When we look at the ESG model that Mark presented earlier, do you see that you would use a model like that for your social enterprise to maybe talk to potential investors, or to actually attract maybe donations from philanthropy, or these? What do you see the link in what you're doing and what you presented?
I actually think the ESG model is a very healthy model, because to go back to Manfred's question, I think solely relying on philanthropy is not the best way to go, because it makes you too vulnerable and at too big of a risk when the philanthropist is no longer able or willing to support your business or support your organization. How are you going to continue? I think it's not a sustainable and not a healthy way to do on long term. For having initial support, it's really nice. And I think it's essential for a lot of startups. However, if you want to grow and scale your impact, it's very essential that you are going to make profits. So you have to look at your income stream. You have to look at, how are you going to increase that? Because if you do not do that, you cannot pay the people that you want to help. And it's not a sustainable business model. And you cannot sustain SDGs if you can't sustain a business. So it's really important that you actually develop yourself and go towards an ESG, and that you grow the people in your organization as well. You help them expand their talents and expand yourself, and the people that you attract as well, because otherwise you will be stuck, and the organization will slowly die out, which I don't think is the goal for us, at least, because we decided when we started we want to build a social enterprise that is going to make real environmental impact. But in order to do that, you have to have some sort of longevity. So you have to be able to grow, and you know, you come in an interesting phase where you have 11 people working for you, but you have to generate sufficient revenue to also support that, the cost, you know, coming with the people, because nobody can live from air. That's why I think it's very interesting, and I'm really happy with the links Mark shared, because I'm really going to look into that, because I think it's essential for every organization that really wants to, you know, push the SDGs. You have to also have a solid business case. I hope that answers your question.
If I can just add something as well, I think like Sabine's business example as well, you shouldn't just think of it as an environmental enterprise. It's not just about recycling. You know, she's also addressing social issues, you know, by the people she hires, and the diversity of the people she hires, for example. She's also addressing governance issues by being sort of like transparent in her reporting and in her taxes and whatever, when she pays her taxes. So it's not just she's as a business, she's not just addressing the environment, she's also addressing social and governance issues, and these things will come through in her reporting. ESG is generally sort of like, you know, people think of it as sort of like, you know, companies that are listed on stock exchanges. And one of the appeals for like Curacao is that you do have a stock exchange, right? And you do have companies that are listed. And as I mentioned before, because, you know, you're associated with the Netherlands, you would have investors from the Netherlands considering your companies more, because, you know, people look at like cultural similarities and stuff like that when they're thinking about investments, right? You know, they probably speak the language, things that are more appealing in terms of Curacao as a location for investments. So I think yes, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think there is a very big difference between investors from the Netherlands and investors from Curacao, for instance. And for investors from the Netherlands to invest in Curacao is not that easy, especially not in companies that have a social character, because even though in the Netherlands it's a much bigger thing than here in the region, I think. There is not a very I would say that there is a very big difference for a small island economy. So there are so many things different here that people don't really consider when they are living in the Netherlands or in the States. Because we don't have a very big market, we don't have scalability, and a lot of the bigger investors are still looking at, you know, what are you making as a profit? And that's difficult when you have market limitations that are non-existent in places where they operate.
Point taken, right? But I assume that, you know, there are several companies that are on the stock exchange that are listed, and that are, you know, with this sort of like thrust towards like global investment. Every country, I think, wants more foreign direct investment into their economies. It's the way sort of like economies grow, that by your companies becoming more sustainable, you open yourselves to more foreign direct investment, because this is where the thrust of foreign direct investment is going.
Well, it's definitely true that for bigger companies that we work with, that they are required to check certain boxes for sustainability, because otherwise they will not be a partner for the bigger companies that are not based on Curacao but are global companies.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I still do have a question on the ESG, because you really emphasized all the aspects of the ESG, and in that you made clear what ESG is, and that you have certification, Mark. But I think a lot of companies here are just starting with the SDGs, starting to know the SDGs, you know, the awareness on the SDGs, and it might be a big step if you are talking about certification and you know, just getting to know the SDGs and yeah, trying what works for my company, what works for us to show the public that maybe we have a positive impact on the SDGs. So is there, can you use, is there a light version or is there another version, you know, for companies just to make their first steps into the world of the SDGs in the world of showing the public what impact they have on the environment and other
so I think of course, I think when people think of ESG, and you know, like you throw around like values in the trillions of dollars, you think in terms of large corporations. All right, I think most if you're a registered company with, you know, the company's registry, you have to produce annual reports, for example, right? Regardless of the size of your company. All right, so it's a good thing for even small companies to integrate what they're doing for the environment, what they're doing socially, and what they're doing governance-wise into their reporting, regardless of their size. Not to just report in terms of their finances, right? Because every company that is encountering some success will then want to go to the next level and would require investment, all right? And you don't have to think of like a large institutional investor like BlackRock, for example. Younger people in society who, or like, you know, the pension plans locally, for example, companies that are looking for social enterprises to invest in, they will look at your reporting, yes, regardless. Now, I would say that in terms, and not to really think of it as a light version, because I think if most companies even looked at what they were doing, right, they would probably find they're addressing a lot of the things involved with ESG already. If you're reporting your taxes, you're already integrating ESG into your business. If you're, you know, hiring, you know, not discriminating against women when you're hiring, and your workplace looks more reflective of society, you're already integrating ESG into your business. All right. If you are not using child labor, you're already integrating ESG into your business. So many companies, regardless of their size, even the small ones, are already checking most of the boxes with regards to the ESG. I think what it comes now is to framing what you're doing in terms of ESG terms when you're doing your reporting, so that you can then attract the investment that's out there for companies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for explaining that one. And that might be for realizing that you already do a lot of these aspects might help lower the drempel. I'm not sure what the English word is.
I mean,
just make it more easy.
Like Sabine's business, I think again, it looked like she had quite a diverse workforce when she showed the group photo, you know. So she already is doing that. For example, she has a diverse hiring practices. Again, her environmental credentials are probably stellar because that is the core of her business. But again, the social things that she is doing and her governance as well, I'm sure she's cheat on her taxes. She is above board with how much she pays in taxes, etc. She has all of her reporting. She submits her finances for audit every couple of years at least. So she's already doing many of the things that an ESG company will do. Going to get the certification can be expensive, as I mentioned. But the thing is, it's a good practice for companies in general to do these things because there are opportunities out there. There are people who will look at your reporting and say, this is something I want to support.
Do you know maybe if the bigger companies on Curacao, like Coca-Cola, I'm just saying something, do they have the ESG certification, or do they have that by their...
Right. So a lot of those big companies are members of the Global Compact that I mentioned earlier, right? So, okay, now it depends again on which framework you're using. There are frameworks and there are frameworks. As I mentioned before, the Global Compact can be a little bit strict and a little bit overly onerous for businesses, right? Because it's from the UN and there's so many criteria that companies might be expected to address. Some of the other ones are a little bit more, I wouldn't use the word forgiving because they're not really, right? But they're a little bit simpler for companies to adopt. And it'll just be a company to go around there and do their homework about which framework works best for them. Now, I didn't go through the process of ESG. I just focused on the benefits of ESG. But in the little handbook, I talk a bit about the process. And in the process, you will talk to your stakeholders, not just your shareholders, your stakeholders, right? So like the fence line communities around your plant, etc. All right. And with those stakeholders, you will determine which things are material to your business, which things have material value to your business that can affect your business success and your business viability and your business survival. And once what the handbook encourages you to do is to find the environmental things that are most material, the social things that are most material to your business, and the governance related things that are most material, and address those. And I think even a very small company, right? Okay, whether you're Coca-Cola or whether you're Sabine's or your Green Phoenix, right? It helps as a company to like do this sort of materiality assessment, figure out which of these things are opportunities for your business, which of these things are threats, address them with your business plan, right? And then importantly, report it, because a potential investor will read it. A potential investor who's with their salt will know that this might be an issue for your viability as a business or your potential for success. And therefore will be like less or more likely to invest in you depending on how you're addressing the things that are highly material to your business.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you, Anneloes. There was another question from Manfred in the chat while we had a healthy discussion going on the uses for ESG. Are there any local examples related to the tourism sector, one of the major sectors in the Caribbean island, of a positive SDG business case? Sabine had already provided an answer related to Debottle, TUI Care Foundation project. Chogogo just hired a graduate of GP. I'm not sure if you can maybe elaborate. And I know on Aruba, we mentioned the Bukutiantara Hotel is a certified carbon neutral resort, which you can also read more about their story in the VNR report that was made for the July reporting session that we did within the kingdom. And I'm not sure if Mark maybe has some examples from his from other islands that he's aware of on positive SDG business cases in the tourism sector.
So I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There are several of the resorts in the Caribbean that are trying to address their carbon footprint to adopt more renewable energy. You see a lot of more resorts with solar panels, etc. on top of them. Several of the resorts recycle their water. All right. You take wastewater to water like the golf course, etc., rather than taking water from the main system. So there are numerous, I think probably too numerous examples to mention of who, especially in the hospitality industry, of companies that are adopting these practices increasingly. And one of the things I probably didn't stress enough in my presentation was the consumer and the customer. And in addition to the investors, at the customer level, people are looking at these things as well. People look to see if the beach in front of your resort is a blue flag beach, for example. If you know the quality of the water in the beach is clean, what you do with your wastewater, do you let it go into the ocean, etc. So more and more the consumer is looking at these things, and I think more and more the resorts, in the hospitality industry are paying more attention to these things as well. Okay. From the past, you know, we had, at least in Trinidad anyway, there were bad examples of, like, you know, people abusing like labor laws and stuff like that in resorts. Those things are less common now because of the scrutiny and the access to information that people have via the internet, TripAdvisor and so on, that people know. They come there and they see, you know, children working in the resort, and they don't want to come there again. They put it on TripAdvisor. So you find that these things are a lot more of the resorts are paying attention to these things.
Thank you, Mark. I think Manfred I hope that does answer your question on different examples that you can look into, not only in Curacao, but also around the Caribbean. I'm looking at the time, and we've been a bit over, but I think it was a very fruitful discussion. And I think actually, Mark, maybe as a nice follow-up, I'm already thinking on a workshop on using the ESG model that you presented, so businesses could actually identify as well for themselves what they're already checking off on, what maybe they should be focusing a bit more attention on. But in order to close this session, I would like to pass it back to Anneloes for her closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Ghislaine, for moderating this session and getting everybody's questions answered in time, and make sure that the two presenters were introduced very, very nicely. And I think we had a very interesting two sides of one story, insight in what can be done for the SDGs and what companies can provide and learn from the SDGs. So I really want to thank Mark and Sabine again for joining us and for sharing their knowledge and their experiences. And I really hope, as Ghislaine said, maybe a workshop to use the ESG a little bit more for companies, especially. That would be very interesting, I think. So thank you again. I want to close this session. With this, I close our digital sessions for the SDG Action Week. And thank you for joining us. And I really hope to see you next year again. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you.